is titled Critical Materials Security and the Circular Economy. And there's really three things we want to bring together. One is this issue of the critical materials, the other is circular economy, and then really the fundamental question is can platforms be brought to bear to address this issue? And we've got an amazing panel actually to discuss that. Typically in an academic setting, you're coming up with hypotheses, propositions, and then you go collect the data to go test it. But I think in this forum, we have a lot of expertise around platforms. So really the point of this panel is to explore how platform business models can potentially be applied in new areas to solve problems. And the critical materials has emerged, interestingly enough, as a really big topic. So if I could bring my panel members up, if they're mic'd up, you can come join me here. And we're going to tackle this big question of critical materials. The New York Times wrote an article on June 2nd that said the United States is facing severe shortages of rare earth magnets is one application of critical materials. Thank you. Come up here. And this goes to this point that we're going to talk about later today is the geopolitics. And as Bettina mentioned, supply chains becoming much more vulnerable to shortages and whatnot. And so an issue, and in fact, as Jeff mentioned, we've been doing this Platform Strategy Summit now for 12 years. Not once have we had a session on critical materials. So I think it's very timely to do that and explore how platforms can potentially play a role in this. And so I'm actually thrilled today to have a very diverse set of perspectives on this issue. I've got two startups here. One is a platform that is in this space. Another is a company that's looking for supply and is very interested in how platforms can help facilitate that. I also have two big incumbents that are in the market in many different ways, and one of them has established their own platform, which is quite interesting, and another is a potential user of platforms, maybe even wanting to do what Siemens has done and have similar platforms as well.
I've been in the industry for almost 25 years, and just to give you background, I come from the background of the gray market. I lived and sold refurbished equipment, professional services, and back then I called it the 80-20 rule. 80% of that material was being reused and 20% was being recycled. Now with so much assets being pumped into the market, I see that switch. And so we decided to start a platform on recycling because I see a lot more needing recycling as the 80% and reuse is becoming 20%. Now, I say that in a nice way because honestly, I think that there are ways to harvest things, there's ways to refurbish things, but there's so much material that our focus was how do we attack the market to make sure the material is actually being disposed of correctly. And so my background again was living in that world, trying to find a way to maximize ROI, but also a grassroots approach and utilizing the network ecosystem of these certified vendors that are in the US market. We focus on R2 and eSteward, and that's the governing agencies of people that are processing material, making sure the data security is important and the environmental impact is important. So those are the two main priorities of our platform that we're working with those people. And typically those are like one or two stores, not multiple sites, but very limited, mom and pop. And we're giving them an opportunity to be available to help process material based on their geographic location, their certification, and their ability to service a client.
All right. So Katie Schindel, I effectively lead environmental sustainability for most of our business. So Schneider is a big company that a lot of people have heard of, but not necessarily know everything that we do. So I'll very briefly say that we have very large hardware presence, as well as the software presence, as well as the services presence related to the safe and efficient distribution and management of energy. and that is several different business divisions that fall under an umbrella that's called energy management. That's where I sit. We also play in the industrial automation space. We also play in the advisory space through a consulting arm of our business that focuses a lot on renewable energy sourcing, energy management, and also just working with clients to reduce environmental impacts, scope 1 and 2 emissions, scope 3 emissions, et cetera. And then we also have software that supports in that is agnostic to our hardware. Sorry, that's many different pieces of the company. And effectively, where I play is really around, because I sit in the business, how do we reduce the environmental impacts of our own footprint? So our own products, how we bring those products out into the market, how do we have the data to support that as well? And then also, how do we use those solutions that we bring to the market to help our customers and our partners to reduce their own environmental impacts? And of course, that can come with a whole bunch of other reasons. It doesn't have to be environmental. It can be cost. It can be resiliency. There's a whole lot of different arguments for why we do this. And that plays quite a lot into the discussion that we're going to have today around critical raw materials, and also just around how do we really effectively drive resource conservation and circularity in everything that we're doing.
But just so people understand, can you just mention the revenue and number of employees that Schneider has? Because I don't think people understand the scale and scope of Schneider and how many countries you operate in.
Yeah, so we operate globally, and I actually should have looked up the numbers directly before coming on stage. We've grown a lot in revenue. I think we're up around 38 billion at this point. Number of employees is around 120, 130,000. French-based, but with a global local strategy. So there are a number of different. It's not central. So my past experience before this was U.S.-based companies. This is more decentralized than that, with a lot of different. How should I say? Almost country for country type operations, region for region type operations, as well as global.
Yeah. If you walk into a commercial building, it's very likely Schneider Electric had something to do with the systems that run those buildings, for example. Great. So, Marie?
Yeah. My name is Mary Callanan. I lead our commercial strategy for Alta. Alta is a startup. It's a breakthrough technology startup. We are a next generation mining technology. But what we really do is separations. I need to go into kind of the core problem of what this is in order to understand what we do. But all of our separations today are done of any critical mineral is monopolized by China. And the reason for that is because separation technology today, which is a solvent extraction process, is fundamentally uneconomical. It's also horrible for the environment. What they mostly do is leach those ores with jet fuel and kerosene and some other stuff. It takes thousands of passes, which fundamentally makes it uneconomical and also makes it horrible for the environment. And through subsidies from the public sector there, they've been able to control the rare earth production, a lot of the critical minerals in the world. So when you hear on the news a lot of this stuff about rare earths, we do have rare earths in the United States. We just can't separate them. And so our technology can separate almost every critical mineral. It is a biotech company. What we do is we grow our own protein and our own resin that enables us to grind up an ore or grind up, let's just say, a magnet from Microsoft's data centers. If you put that into a column, which is a known biomanufacturing technique, the resin and the protein kind of act like little glue, and they can separate each individual element in a single pass. And so what does that do? It makes us cost competitive with China because we can get extremely high purity, extremely high precision, and extremely high yield in a single pass. So yes, I lead our commercial strategy. I've spent over 10 years commercializing breakthrough technologies. My particular expertise is in the American industrial base, particularly in public-private partnerships related to national security, which Alta has a very unique relationship with the United States government. So happy to be here today.
Yeah. So what's fascinating is the US used to have this capability years ago, but it's completely lost it, right? And so now there's a scramble to figure out how to recreate that capability, and new companies are emerging to be able to do that. And we'll dig into that and how this relates to platforms in a minute, but I want to introduce Jackie next.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter. Glad to be here. So honored to be here to meet a lot of smart minds here and share the thoughts and learnings. So talk about a Microsoft circular supply chain a little bit. So this is maybe not a very public, not a well-known organization outside the Microsoft. Even within Microsoft, it's not well known, frankly. But Microsoft doesn't need an introduction, right? How big, how many people employed? We have a data center, just to give you a rough size, is we have probably somewhere 200 to 300 data center across the world. Anywhere that you imagine there's a cloud applications, we're there. And the reverse supply chain, the challenge is you have to collecting all the equipment, and then you have to process them. And then you have to think about what is the downstream channels are. So traditionally is you heard other company talk about it, is a revenue share model, so you're outsourcing the ITAD business and so forth. It's very complicated. If you ask the people, hey, how you can model this business? People always say it's complicated. So what we begin to learn is that through by doing things. In fact, this team is not brand new. We've been inside Microsoft for pretty much decades, starting from day one when Microsoft started producing mice and keyboard. That's how we started, a humble beginning. We don't know anything. And then now we are handling the entire cloud, meaning all the data center retired equipment is going through my team. And we're selecting the suppliers, testing their competencies, evaluating the performance, so forth. And we learn a lot of things. And the digital platform you guys probably talk about is, we started the digital platform roughly before and during the pandemic. I think the pandemic is one of the positive things is that you spend more time thinking because you cannot go anywhere. So you have to think. And then I think that's one of the positive outcomes coming from that. And also I heard Siemens team also testing their ideas, right? They have the challenge, well, how big we're going to start, how big we're going to fail, sort of things. Fortunately, we use a different approach in Microsoft. I think we almost like a startup idea. We start something very simple, very easy to understand, very easy to manage. And we created this so-called B2B platform. We call it Circularity Hub. We call it CH as well internally. And that's the platform interacting with our suppliers directly. So it's internal as well external. It's enlightening us a lot. We really learned that, hey, that's how you can engage in the market. That's how many people there like to see what you have. And then later on, the rare earth thing is roughly start about the same time because fortunately, we have a very good connection with the academic world. Microsoft internally, we have a Microsoft research. So we hire a lot of senior scientists. And there's a number of PhD in Redmond, you won't believe you throw a rock, you're hitting a doctor or something. And then, so the rare earth is starting with almost an academic idea. What are we going to do about this? So let's testing something. We heard there's a rare earth in hard drive. What is really how much it is? So we actually, myself, has started this exploratory journey and then talked to different people and started doing research and testing. And we find something really interesting. And now everybody started caught on, say, oh, it's great. How come you're not doing this? I said, we're already doing this. And I just want to learn more, through Peter and all you folks and how we can energize the whole market, make sure people are aware of that. You could sit on the gold mine, you may don't even know it. So.
Yeah. Okay. So let's dig in a little bit more into the platforms and how they operate in this space. Sean, can you talk a little bit about how you launched? One of the classic challenges for platforms is solving the chicken and egg problem. Yeah. How did you identify the market space, and then how did you find both sides of the market, and how did you go about onboarding them? And give us a sense of that time horizon of how long it took.
Yeah. So, being in the industry for so long, as I was giving on my intro, is I saw the need and the change and the shift of material being reused versus recycled, and I saw a lot of people that are in business I'm coming from another approach. We've been talking a lot about AI. I'm going to come from the human element. I believe in people keeping their jobs. I believe in people doing the good things and doing the right things. There was a good thing out of COVID because, like he said, there was people locked up and thinking a lot. That's when we came up with the idea is that we saw a lot of material movement going too far just for disposal. And people that were having trouble getting into supply chain for big companies to support them, but we're doing the work and we're certified and credible to do the work. So we said, how do we bring them to the table and have that option of an ecosystem for the large clients so they don't have to transport material to a regional model? The dilemma is one of two things. You can have a local model. If you have an internal team, you have a large asset recovery team that's managing vendors, managing jobs, managing compliance, managing administration. And that's very cumbersome, and that you've seen a lot of risks going in place. So with reduction in force going on, they don't have the resources to manage all of these vendors. The other model is most companies go with a regional model. They identify one or two, maybe three different kind of super vendors that have locations in regions. The outcome of that, though, is you're going to have high transportation and high CO2 output. So we said we can take the best of both of these. We bring on certified vendors. We actually vet them. We bring them onto our system, and we make them available to the client so that they can come through our system and access material disposition. And our current ratio is about 60 miles from wherever the material is so that can be locally disposed of, processed, and then everything is tracked in our system to make sure that they have the compliance, they have the job tracking, they have the financials, everything is in our system so that it's easy to move on. And the beauty of this is that it's removing the RFP element and digitizing it. You can do immediate RFPs. You can actually do pivots real quick because in this industry, people go out of business, people change jobs, companies go under, get bought. You have to be able to pivot on a dime if you have material that needs to be moved. So that gives that capability to make quick moves, make sure you're working in a compliant fashion, and have all the administration support around it.
Yeah. Can you just give some examples of the materials that you're handling?
Yeah, I mean, our focus has been on 5 categories. When we say e-waste, it's really things that plug in, but we focus on telecom material, mobility material, network material, infrastructure, and then raw materials. And then we're going to get into that more when we talk about the raw materials. But it was meant to be a client to a service provider model, but we're seeing the extraction of go from a service provider to a service provider, and you could see that the marketplace is just being able to connect people that have the material with the people that want to process or buy the material.
Right. And then can you give a sense of the size of the network that you've built?
Yeah, so we started out, there was about 1,000 certified service providers across the US, and we went to the governing agencies and we have an API through them to verify if they are certified, what their credentials are, but then we go above and beyond and we do our own auditing and we vet them and bring them on. So out of the 1,000, we've got about 300 different service providers on our system right now across the US, but some of them have more than one site. So I'd say I have about 500 certified locations on our system of people that can utilize and process material. And then we also have non-certified. Those are the people that just process raw material like steel and copper and that don't have any data security issues. So you have that flexibility depending on what the material is and what the outcome you're looking for.
Right. And just, sorry, I'm going to dig into this just a little bit more. So how does a client that uses your platform, I guess, post jobs and actually like do a transaction?
Sure. So there's one of two ways. We've built it for self-driving. You can go to the system, you can load your material, you have an inventory and pictures. It's kind of like anything if people go to an eBay or an Amazon, but the more that you put on there, the better response you're going to get. And it goes out into an auction format. And it goes out to, if you need certified recyclers or providers, they will only see that opportunity and they'll bid on that. But what we've actually seen on the other piece of it is that that's a transaction model. But we've also kind of grown into more of a managed service model because when I said earlier, those rifts are happening, those people that were managing those systems aren't available. We're working alongside the 1 or 2 people left in those areas that help them build programs built on their filtering and their KPIs. So we actually come along and we work alongside them to build a program to help them say, hey, instead of going to an auction, we'll identify a local person in each market for you, wherever your material is, and help manage that material movement. And if something has to change, that's the beauty of our system, is we can pivot really quickly. We're constantly having more people come in and sign up on our system, and we're actually having more requirements from clients saying, I need this, this, this. So it's just kind of evolutionally snowballing and growing.
Right. So the way I've been looking at RGX, you remember the story of waste management going in and basically rolling up and integrating the entire industry under one company, and then now companies that secure contracts with waste management, they're signing long-term contracts. Whereas if you join RGX, you're basically doing a jobs basis, and so it's kind of a decentralized and continuous and dynamic platform environment, which I think it lends to a lot of flexibility, both geographically but also materials, right?
Right.
It's not just we do this and you guys deal with the rest. So anyway, that helps address what they call the long tail problem, where you have this standardized kind of common stuff, and then always these companies have these oddball things. And so how do you handle that? If you have a big network of lots of different providers that can do different things, you're more able to address that problem. So great. I'm going to turn to Jack next, because he has, he's an incumbent. They built their own platform, so somewhat different from having an independent platform. So can you explain a little bit about the thinking behind why you decided to have your own versus go with a third party? What was the rationale behind that? And then how does your platform work in actual practice, and how do you do transactions?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. It is really a choice question. I would say that do you want to use a third party, or you want to have your own in-house B2B platform, right? So what we're thinking is, from the beginning, we're a little bit old-fashioned, frankly. So Microsoft is really hyper on compliances, regulations, because we're interacting with so many nations, so many regions. They have a unique background. So we want to make sure that we truly know the suppliers we're dealing with. And so we carefully selected the suppliers we are allowed to bid on the product. We, besides the digital platform, we actually have a strategy. So it's very similar to this morning's panel, is that you have to have a strategy first, and then second is you design a platform to fit in that strategy. And the strategy we are thinking is that there's a total like 5 pillars or 5 priorities. Number one, we're thinking is security, meaning that you have to know where the material goes, and who is the supplier you really trust, and who is your long-term supplier. So we prefer a relationship supplier management, but also we like the transactional part of it. So we kind of want a cake and eat it too. So how we do that? The combinations leading to a B2B platform. And also the second priority we really care about is so-called recycling and reuse efficiency. This is very similar to what you guys are saying, is, hey, if I can reuse a product, reduce carbon emission, no doubt about that. And if we recycle something, we need to work with somebody that is truly efficient, have the best of the technology in the world to recover all the elements, all the metal we can use. Right? So that's later on leading into the rare earths. What the heck we're digging that for? Because there's only 1 or 2%. But hey, there's very little material in there, but it's very useful. And then the third one we care about is so-called revenue. Everybody knows that, right? The business runs on revenue, runs on profitability, and we have a lot of motivation behind that too. And number 3 priority is what I call the scale. Okay, scale meaning that if I just give you a rough number, maybe I'm not allowed to tell you how many equipments or product we're handling. They are literally in the millions we're handle. Okay, so 200 to 300 data centers they retire. We're literally handling millions. And how we're doing that efficiently?
So can you explain exactly some examples of some of the stuff?
So product, the most common product is from the servers, data center, memory and CPUs.
Okay.
Right? Why is that? If you look at server design, every server is 6 to 8 memory sticks. You multiply by how many servers? Do the math very quickly, okay? And then not only hard drive. You guys all talk about how many hard drive per server. Multiply real quickly, okay? And And then the decommission business in Microsoft is truly a strategic thing, because we talk about AI. What does AI implies, right? Impact for supply chain is space and power in the end. And what does the decommission do? Is saving space, saving power. If you cannot remove things, you cannot move in things. So the life goes that journey, and so that's why scale is important for us. And then other things important is that innovation, right? Well, innovation is that why we're doing some risky things, why we're doing something nobody have done before, right? Because innovation drives progress, drives profitability, drives discovery. When you discover things, that's where you're getting results. We're doing AI today is because somebody did hard work, research, silent work for decades ago, right? Rare earth is also the same thing. The real discovery and research done decades ago, and now people begin to apply that, right? It's not just they invented the technology yesterday. There's some technology like theirs invented yesterday, but the fundamental research done long time ago. So anyway, so we are addressing all the pillars, and that's when we look at the strategy, we decided essentially a B2B internal platform is a better fit for Microsoft, because we're not dealing with a lot of consumer. Actually, for us, it's no consumer product. We do have a division called devices or Surface. They have a Xbox and so forth. We believe that their model is not exactly the same. We internally discuss, hey, should we putting their product on our platform too? But when we find out there's a little bit too much of hassle, so we just simplify and dumb it down to do whatever we need to do to improve the model. If things work, then we will scale. And that's another good tradition for Microsoft, is that if there's some risky thing we can do and control the risk, the management tend to approve that, to do a small scale testing. And so you don't have a disaster in your hand if it doesn't work, because everything fail, pass is 50-50 chance.
Super. Okay,
Yeah,
so we've got two models here. One is a startup, independent, serves a broad network, and then Microsoft, who's built their own platform, but also has a large network, because you've onboarded a bunch of companies. But it seems like you've decided that you want really control of the governance of that platform. So it's led to that. So let me turn now to users of platforms. Katie, if I can turn to you, how do you think about it? Schneider is actually famous for having a partnership strategy, right? You have tons of partners out there. When you think of this space, how do you think about platforms? How does it work for a large company to think about how to leverage platform strategies? And has Schneider been thinking about both their own product mix, but also maybe even being a partner to other companies that you already serve to help them with the disposition of assets?
Okay, so one is, I'll say we do also have platforms, but I'm going to stay away from that for the time being, just because for the purpose of this discussion, you can think about platforms at multiple levels, right? So, and we think about partnerships as well at multiple levels. If I use a specific example to kind of point to it, trying to stay within the critical raw material space, I'll use copper as an instance, right? Well-known resiliency challenges, slightly different from the rare earth conversation, but still big issues. Definitely something we rely on, right? I mean, we make products that use a lot of electronics, use a lot of metal. It's a key material for us. And we have a partnership with Glencore, just to make it very precise, right? So Glencore is a supplier for copper. We can partner with them on two levels. One of those levels is how do we source? How do we basically partner with companies like Glencore and others to increase the resiliency of our sourcing, add materials into that, which can come from materials that we take back or others take back and flow in. And I'm a big fan of sort of open loops, in the sense that it doesn't have to come from us. We just want to make sure that there is more material flowing into the take back and reuse of assets, whether that is a full asset, a part, a material, right? So for copper, we use a lot of copper. We can feed into that system. Others can feed into that system. And we want to be able to drive supply effectively, help to drive supply into, say, a company like Glencore. And we can partner with them to facilitate that by helping to deliver our own, and also potentially by collaborating with others. So that's one side, which is the sourcing side.
So,
There's-
so just to understand, so you're actually seeing a convergence of raw material with recycled material coming together? Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yep.
Because Glencore is well known as a mining company, and they're really
Correct.
in the business of extracting virgin, but they've started to get into circular, which is really interesting.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and we have some direct connections, right, to be able to feed basically our recycled feedstock into their supply chain, and then back into ours. The other side of it is how do we also help to make their operations more efficient, more automated, be able to drive potential alternative sources of energy, be able to help them manage the energy consumed in the process, which is a lot, to be better done, right? For reasons of resource efficiency in the manufacturing process, whether the feedstock is virgin or recycled, right? So it feeds multiple goals. It's not just about the supply and the availability of supply, but it's going to make them more resilient as an operation. It's going to help drive decarbonization through that process. And so that allows us to support them on multiple layers, whether that's digital twins and automation in sort of process automation, for example, or whether that is helping to connect the dots on energy supply or straight up sort of traditional energy management in terms of the distribution of energy in their processes. There's multiple layers in which we can help them to improve what they're doing and improve the efficiency and decarbonize that as well, or reduce water use or whatever else, right? Any other kind of resource conservation. And then that's going to make the output a more decarbonized output that we can then consume into our own products, which is a big part of our decarbonization strategy as well, given the amount of energy consumed and the dirtiness of the energy that can potentially be consumed in that process. So that's a very simplistic kind of example of partnership. It's one partner playing with another partner, but just to give an example of sort of how those pieces play together. And as we're thinking about how to grow, for me, it's really about this in a way, if I take the word platform and I sub in the word system, right, it's kind of about how do we pull those pieces together and think about who do we need to play with at different layers of that. And you're right, I mean, Schneider has a lot of history of working with any number of different types of players on the venture side with investment, on the startup side, lots of history of both supporting startups and also acquiring startups, being able to think through also, how do we collaborate with other companies, whether in our industry or others, and also consider, platforms that are out there as third parties that we might want to participate in because that helps us to scale out.
Gotcha. Okay. So, Mary, when you think about, you're a new player in the market, but you need access to supply.
Yeah.
So I'm interested in sort of how you're thinking about getting that access to supply, and then how might platforms help with that issue? Yeah,
it's a good question, one that keeps me up every night. So I think one of the main reasons why I did join Alta is what's particularly unique about this breakthrough technology is it's so close to commercializing. A large reason for that is because it's spun out of a national lab. So it seems like it was developed yesterday. It was actually developed many years ago. And we have an exclusive license to commercialize that. And so the technology works. Like I have all the proof points to go to someone like Jack or Katie and be like, hey, I can do and can prove to you I can do what we have. The problem is, can I get enough feedstock to make it work at a scale, right? And so the core problem I have is that until recently, there was no market for magnets because no one can separate them. And so I'm shaping a market on two sides, right? I'm trying to shape this sort of upstream market of how do I take, in the example of a hard drive, how do I convince a company like Microsoft that there's a real they're sitting on a gold mine. Microsoft's much further along than others, but a lot of OEMs don't think about this. And that they should take their end-of-life assets that typically go to their own kind of disposition stream and incentivize those people to disassemble a magnet. So it's like adding cost, adding complexity already to a system that's very low margin and focus on maximizing scrap value. From there, I need a supplier who can actually isolate the rare earths in that particular magnet. That is an undifferentiated technology, but it's one that requires a large manufacturing infrastructure, which we don't have in the United States today. And that's because there weren't anyone domestically viable who could do that, do the separations, right? So I'm like a tier 3 or 4, but everyone above me is never incentivized or has any desire, right, to disassemble magnets, which for me is the near-term resource. Mining, right, of course, is the long-term play, but near-term, the sort of recycled asset and the stage of the company we're at makes total sense. It's a very high-grade feedstock. It's about 30% rare earths and growing, which is pretty incredible. So how do I think about platforms? A critical problem, which I think you've seen through MP and the deal that the United States government did with them last week, is the info asymmetry problem. So you'd be surprised that I get a lot of inbound from brokers trying to sell me magnets. The sort of problem that you get over time is it's so, the market for commodities is so, especially for something like magnets where there is no known market, it's just like so, there's such an info asymmetry. So it's like, well, what's your willingness to pay? Well, near term, I'm focused on R&D, so it's like kind of infinite, right? And they can kind of take advantage of that and exploit it, right? And so when I think about a platform, I think about info transparency, right? And fundamentally, that's what I need in order to incentivize the US government, a public-private partnership, to flood the system with money in order to consolidate and make this whole system real in the United States, right? So I think about transparency. I also think about traceability. Most of our end-of-life assets flow abroad today, which is a problem, right? So you get this sort of proxy trade war where like, well, there's multiple kind of nascent companies popping up in this sort of domestic supply chain refining, processing market. But so that's increasing the willingness to pay and kind of creating this market distortion. And at the same time, we get this sort of trade proxy war where I don't know, the other entities abroad are also driving the price of those commodities too, right? And so being able to have traceability, not only like, is this asset, even if it's coming from domestically or abroad, I can prove that I processed this in the United States, which is ultimately what matters. That sort of traceability and traceability of who I'm buying it from and who I'm selling it to becomes a critical enabler in the ultimate goal of like keeping this domestic, right?
So are you developing or working with a third party to do a digital product passport in this area? And how do you do that? Because you're going down to the elemental level. It's not like a discrete product.
Yeah. I mean, we're starting to think about it, right? The strategy is twofold. One in which you work with people like Siemens, Katie, Jack, right? And you say the end state for this at scale 1 to 2 years from now is some sort of licensing or co-location strategy, right? Where we can create this. So you have the platform, you have the scale and the traceability. We just bolt on this separation technology. Now you have a truly circular strategy, right? Then there's also this near-term opportunity, which is more like heavy transaction costs, individual transactions to kind of push the company along from a technology standpoint, where we have been working, you know who's the furthest along in this is auto. So we've been working a lot with like kind of auto OEMs, leveraging the lessons learned from battery. Katie brought up a great idea that you can leverage lessons learned from copper, right? Where they already have implemented this sort of passport. Mm-hmm. And so they're just like kind of tweaking that and saying, well, we know where this is going already through a consolidated scrapper environment. Try to see if you can convince them to do magnets too. So we're starting to think through that, but I would kind of summarize it as always like start with this sort of strategic end state with the OEMs, which is ultimately what they care about, right? And then push it along through some sort of transactional based acquisitions through a platform, ideally.
Right. Yeah, I've thought a bit about the analogy back to the early days of natural gas. In the natural gas markets, there was no Henry Hub. Companies were doing bilateral contracting, and then finally a centralized place that served as a spot market for this. We don't have this yet in the United States for rare earth metals, but I think thinking about this and having this group of people really think about this, because government policy is going to be a driver in the early stages, and I tell you, everything I've seen the government do is all about securing new supply. So what do? This deal you just mentioned wasn't to create a platform, it was to invest in mining capability. So they're thinking of kind of, in my view, kind of old school ways of securing these supply when there's tons of material out there. We've been producing, and there's magnets all over the country. It's kind of how platforms can play a role in reaggregating these materials in an efficient way and matching them with companies that can actually process them efficiently, which is an information problem. Yeah. It's very similar to Airbnb. Airbnb doesn't do in assets, they deal in information. And so we need better information markets for critical materials.
Right. I mean, I think
I saw a little finger come up.
The one thing I'll mention, and I want to hear Jack's point, is that the deal the U.S. just closed with MP, though, has downstream effects to a platform, right? The deal wasn't, if you really look at the nuance of the deal, it's a price floor.
Can you just explain to people in the room, this is pretty rarefied stuff that
we're
only
like
some people...
deep in macroeconomics at this point, which I love.
Just explain briefly what this MP deal is.
So the United States government invested in MP, became like a 20% roughly shareholder in MP. MP is the only rare earth scaled mine in the United States. An interesting aside is that they were already semi-owned by a Chinese company and sent 80% of their offtake for separation to China, right? China. So that probably makes sense why this happened, right? But putting that aside, the nuance of the deal is one that's rooted in a guarantee on EBITDA and how that happened over 10 years. So it's essentially an agreement by the United States government that they will implement a price floor and cover their costs. But explicitly in the deal that there was that they would buy neodymium and praseodymium, which is the most fundamental rare earth at Mountain Pass, at $110 a kilogram minimum, right?
So they've become a core off-taker, essentially.
No, they would reimburse the difference.
Oh, I see. So
to the
they're
sale
coming
to
in
any
with the
private,
differential. If
right.
the markets go sideways in a way that's...
But that's 2 times the price today.
Okay.
Right, so
that's a nice off-take agreement.
Right, so like they can sell it for more, right? But it kind of creates a price floor, right? And I think the critical point here is that they're trying to prevent these crazy fluctuations that you see that's happening right now, right? Where
Which
we're like
disincentivize investment in this sector.
Right.
That's
Or they're
the
trying to
big
create
problem.
as much price transparency as possible, right? Because it's just so volatile and it's fundamentally rooted in speculation, not supply-demand gap. I mean, like let's just take like a million steps back, right? Even if we didn't have what was going on with China, we would still have a crazy supply-demand gap. We don't have enough rare earths to meet our goals related to the energy transition. So
Right.
Rare earths are critical to any electric motor in cars or in wind turbines or AI, which is what powers data centers. And we need more and more and more rare earths as our data centers become more powerful, right? And so it's like just such a serious problem that the government's trying to get rid of the sort of speculative nature that underpins that supply-demand imbalance. And so it's kind of the first step.
Interesting. So you had a point you wanted to make?
Oh, yeah. So maybe I was keep on thinking about, what other companies can benefiting from digital platform, right? I think most company probably already have it, but they don't realize that. That's my assessment is. So Microsoft goes through the same kind of searching, like, hey, what are we going to do about ourselves here? One of the things that Microsoft invested over decades is very important thing is that knowing what you have, okay? Before you can addressing the value, you know what you have. And that's always a very simple selling strategy. If you don't know what you're selling, you're just selling air, right? And what we have is a electronic bill of material system, So everything we deliver to the data centers, we know what they built from. So when you do a reverse supply chain, you reverse that process. So you're exploding the bomb, that's the word, terminology. Exploding the bomb, you know what you have. So when I first did the calculation, say, hey, here's what is the magnet and rare earth you can producing from the fleet. And here is how much money could be worth. And people say, oh, really? How come we did not know that? All right? It's just simply because there's a data in front of you. If you're using that, you will find out the inside things. All right? And then later on, when we, so every company, I think, should start thinking that what you already have, take advantage of that. Most of the manufacturing companies should have electronic bomb already. If you don't have one, you better start doing that right now. I think the Microsoft advantage is we build a bunch of software engineers, and they have a lot of a mission behind it to make sure this thing standardized. And also another thing is to force us to do that is that we don't have our own factories. We do have a sort of independent supplier, right? But we're not the factory owner per se. They're making product for many people. So in order to control the suppliers, you gotta have to tell them what they're supposed to do. So that's where the electronic bomb becomes such a powerful tool. And now you just reverse that. You become your own platform per se. You know what you have. And that's what's translating to value. I think you guys, even the independent platform, will see the same thing. You say, hey, I know what I have, I know how much it worth, and then I can do my cash flow calculation.
There's one word coming to my mind here, and it's education.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Either clients that have the e-waste don't know the value of it, or service providers that have the material don't know where they can go to the next level with it downstream, where you can do extraction. We're moving. We're such in a fast-paced environment. Sometimes recycling is the last thing to be thought of when you're focusing on the new technology coming out, the new bright shiny star. That you're sitting on gold or you're sitting on a value that can actually bring you ROI. And you've seen separately that sustainability goals and asset recovery have been two separate initiatives. And if you can bring those together with education and transparency, then you have a winning solution.
Yeah. So Katie, you work in a big company and you're trying to drive some of these initiatives. Can you talk just briefly about some of the issues that you confront with, realizing these opportunities and within a company?
Great, because that sets me up to make the point that I was going to jump in with. So one of the things I'm thinking about is if we think about the actual supply chain, right? So supply chains are set up to be forward. And right now I'm really talking about material supply, right? So if we think about, for example, we're doing a lot to try to remove remove the carbon and also the waste, like from a plastic perspective, pollution, out of our inbound supply chain by sourcing different types of materials. Well, that's actually a lot of effort, right? And the supply chain, even though we do actually do a lot of our own manufacturing, we still rely on a lot of suppliers. And so you're not only trying to change your own sourcing, but you're also trying to change other people's sourcing. And you need to make sure that there's sufficient supply available to meet the demand, and that's not going to fluctuate to a point where you suddenly have an availability problem, right? So I frequently make the argument for the take back and reuse of material as a resiliency strategy, but you need that material to then be able to flow back in not only in the amount, but also in the place where you need it. And frequently, you have it in one place, but you don't have it in another. You can't move it to the other one, or it doesn't make sense, and then your whole kind of piece falls down. Or maybe you manage to implement it partially, but not at the scale that you'd want to. So I think that there's a very interesting question about how do you, and we do this on certain topics in terms of building up capabilities within our supply chain. In a way, it's about building up the capability, but also the alternative way of thinking about the supply chain, potentially disrupting sources because these supply chains have existed for a very long time, right? So they're very, very long-standing relationships, and it's a matter of either getting the supplier to change relationship with another supplier, or to pull in a new source of material, or to have that source of material feed into a supplier that you have worked with, right? But there's some changes that are required, and those changes are required in many, many, many places. So one change we can make can definitely drive a benefit, but if we don't drive it sufficiently, we create our own resiliency problem because we only have one supplier. And then that becomes, I can actually, when I was at Cisco, we were working on a project where we did connect the dots between a recycler and this was a plastic situation. So we had someone who was actually already working with our recycler, so that was fantastic. And they were already pulling together material, and then they were shipping it to our manufacturer, and then the ports got stopped, and then there was a quality issue, and there were a million different things that got in the way. And it was a single point thing, so then it all dies, right? And so it's a matter of being able to make sure that when you're changing it, yeah, you can use one example as a proof of concept to show that it works, but if you only stay there, your procurement colleagues are never going to be okay with that, and they shouldn't be, because you have a business continuity problem waiting to happen. So I think that's when I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking about how basically how do we basically use, potentially, to bring it back to platforms, how do we potentially use these platforms to help create that scale and that geographic diffusion to have a stable source of supply of what we actually need, which can then serve as a demand driver, which is fantastic because we want more of it, and so that we don't have to create every situation one by one by one, and then that can become a resource to our supply chain that we can say, hey, we're not going to tell you necessarily where to supply, or maybe we do, depending on the relationship, but we're giving you this resource so that you have an easier time making this transformation that we're asking you to make, which is a big deal. So I think it's how do we connect the dots across the whole? That's one of the biggest challenges that I see, is connecting the dots across enough pieces that we start to build up these new supply chains that are effectively just a evolution of existing supply chains, but in a way that reconsiders what that supply chain looks like.
Right, great. So let me orientate for this last round of questions to kind of what you see happening in the future. So Sean, where do you want to take RGX, and what do you see as exciting or challenging in scaling? Because I don't know if you've seen what they call the circularity gap report. The numbers, or at least the analysis they're doing, is showing that actually circularity is declining globally, not advancing. So we not only have to expand this, we have to make up for a decline in circularity. So there's just a huge need for this. I was just curious, briefly, where do you think you'd like to take?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think we're agile. I mean, we are small, so we're able to pivot quickly instead of big company corporate initiatives. So it's easier for us to turn a shift quickly. We're dependent on the market. So we're a two-sided marketplace. So I'm hearing from the people that have the e-waste, and I'm hearing from the people that process the e-waste. And so we're trying to stay above that with them, and that's how we build our next step. So we're able to pivot quickly. There's going to be obviously governance. There's going to be compliance. I mean, we're trying to push more standardization across the U.S. I mean, the U.S. is pretty far behind in terms of standardization, in terms of regulation and governance to the rest of the world. So we want to play in that. We want to be more of thought leaders, education source, but we also want to be. My buddy Steve said it in his last one, is saying we're a tool. We want to be a tool, but there's still the human thought and the evolution and the relationships that need to happen in order to make these things have positive output. So I think it's kind of we have a strategic plan, but we're also influenced by the factors that happen daily that we can't plan and see. So it's really working in a collaborative effort with everybody, all the stakeholders, to make sure that we're making the right strategic moves.
Gotcha. And I would imagine for you, you're seeing with AI an acceleration of turnover of assets in these data centers.
Yeah.
What are you seeing happening in the future with your team and how you're trying to have an impact?
Yes, absolutely. I think that there's like you said, there's opportunities and challenges, right? There's always going together, right? If there's no challenges, I mean, everybody can be bored. And the AI impact, I would say, is impacting everything. That's my opinion. Even though you may not feel it, that means you miss that signal. You are impacted. For example, we know that AI requires power and space, like I mentioned, right? Power translating what Katie talked about, copper, right? Talk about rare earths. And space requires that we move the supply chain more efficiently. Things have to move faster. And when you move faster, you cannot create chaos. So your precision have to improve over time. Okay, and also transactions had to be secure, more efficient. We're running a very small team with millions of components. How we're doing that is through automation. You don't have a choice. And AI, we already begin to discuss it. There's certain early emerging things with, the more like a chatbots sort of sections and helping people to directing triage issues. But also we begin to see AI can automating a lot of things, like, for example, analyzing the pricing, right? Mm-hmm. Analyzing who is your supplier that is more winning in the long haul. What kind of product driving the market? It's something very, very fundamental. Like we're looking every day, hey, is the DDR3 pricing increasing or DDR4 pricing increasing? What the heck is behind it? What kind of CPUs become popular? Why is that? It's all through the data analysis. In the past, is a Excel sheet and all the stuff, pivot tables. But in the future, we're definitely developing AI tools, so you can discover signals much faster. It's helping everybody because our suppliers love to hear our signals too. But we don't want to influence their thinking too much, right? Because when you're dealing with commodities, you're telling people your understanding is sometimes you're telling people what to do. And that's something you don't want to do, influencing the market too much. Because our volume is so big, anything we do is sort of disturbing the market. And we really want to avoiding that. But I think there's exciting things ahead of time. The platform become more complicated. We need to handle more product, more volume, more regions, and more security requirements. So when you talk about recycling versus reuse, in fact, I see that it's quite dynamic. It's probably hard to model at this moment because when the security feature increases, right, it's pushing people to recycle more rather than reselling. There's certain product you just cannot resell anymore. And so we don't know how to play it out, to be honest with you. I see is that we need to be prepared. Resiliency is a key word for supply chain. You cannot sleep on the wheel, and you have to be prepared for any kind of scenario.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Mary, the U.S. is still hyper-dependent on external supply. Mm-hmm. Where do you see this going, and what's your thoughts on the near term? I won't push you out to 2030, but at least over the next 2 years.
I mean, we've talked a lot about like the domestic strategy, which I think is like really focused here. I think there's tremendous opportunity with peer-friendly, trade-friendly countries, right? Like Europe, some parts of APAC have much more consolidated recycled streams, lower cost labor, everything that would sort of unlock the fundamentals of a super scaled competitive extraction technology, right? And so when I think about, I think the real opportunity, which is a harder opportunity, is in the United States. That will take a little bit of time, but we can prove the proof of concept, I think, in markets where they're more consolidated and more incentivized, or there's the right dynamics to create a commercial product quicker abroad. And so we're kind of focused on a two-pronged strategy of trying to find the right markets and the right partners who have those types of.
Gotcha. And so, Katie, I'm going to ask you a question about the future. Thanks. Regarding decarbonization and circularity, do you see these as being separate tracks? Are they converging? And then how do platforms fit into that equation?
So definitely not separate, but a lot of people don't understand them. So that's definitely an education point that we're always trying to touch on. And we do have to consider that the direct carbon benefits of aspects of circularity are not huge. And there are trade-offs, and so it's not this super nice picture that sometimes also gets painted of, oh, it's automatically huge on both sides. It's like, well, no, you have to really consider what you're doing and how it works. But we are very much tying together, for example, recycled content as a decarbonization strategy, or other types of alternative sources, as well as driving greater efficiency. Say energy efficiency and use of renewable energy sources in the manufacture of either virgin or recycled content. So it all definitely ties together. And one of my big soapbox topics is how much they are intertwined. And that is a huge part of what we're trying to drive. And sorry, the second part is...
Well, I was just thinking a lot of companies hire chief sustainability officers, not chief circularity officers. But I don't know if you're seeing this as well, where sustainability officers are now having to think about reverse supply chains and thinking about circularity. And then are there carbon benefits to that? But they also have revenue benefits. So
definitely, yeah. And I guess I'm a biased source because, as you mentioned, my previous role was Director of Circular Economy at Cisco, and that was a holistic, effectively it was almost everything we were doing on environmental sustainability for the company was part of our circular economy strategy.
Gotcha.
So in that instance, circular economy as the umbrella, circular economy is fundamentally a resource conservation strategy, right? It's just that circular economy became the new term as of 10, 15 years ago or so. It kind of got a lot of attention, and I think that it's beneficial, and we often use the term circular business models as well when we're specifically talking about the management of assets, the life cycle management of assets side of the equation. But people shouldn't forget the circular economy is bigger than just the asset management side of the equation, right? So that's part of the education piece always. To me, sustainability and circular economy can both be used as umbrella terms to address, and it's really about the audience. But at its core, what we're really driving when we're driving any sustainability strategy, and this has been the case always, but it's particularly important now, is there are a lot of economic resiliency, et cetera, benefits to what we're doing from a sustainability perspective and from a circular economy perspective, and it's just a question of how do we what piece are we focused on for a given audience or a given initiative? But at the end of the day, it all adds up to the end result, and the end result can fall under whatever umbrella you want to use.
So in the time we have, can we just get 2 questions from the audience? Yeah. Any questions? Okay.
That
Do you
means
want
we did great.
This one.
We'll get one from Jeff.
I'll ask a very brief one, and let's keep it brief because I know we're right at lunch. So, Peter, you opened talking about the critical minerals and how these circular platforms and reusability are really a national security interest as well. And maybe you answer it, but what fraction do you think, on what timeline, can new supply end up being sunsetted and then really get more circularity so we have a closed loop system?
I actually have an opinion on this topic, which is I think the policy community that focuses on security and this topic of critical materials has very little knowledge of platforms and how platforms can contribute. It's not the solution, it's part of the solution, but they know very, very little about this topic. And so I think this education point you mentioned, that making them aware that just pouring money into new mines isn't necessarily the only or best solution. We need a more diverse solution, and market solutions need to be part of the equation. And I'm just not seeing that in DARPA or ARPA or any of these. And so I think this community can do a big service in just writing about this, explaining why platforms are important. And I go back to energy markets. Energy markets work better now because we have spot markets. We're always going to have long-term contracting, but we should have, it would be super cool, and I think it would help your business and yours to have a marketplace for critical materials that buyers and sellers could come together and understand what they are, and they would be transparent, and the buyers and sellers would be vetted so you don't get these gray markets that currently exist.
Yeah, maybe I can add something real quick regarding why you want to have a platform. Is that if you're not a party of the negotiations, you're just not in the market. I think that's where the key you have to understand. This is very classic sort of business 101s, right? And that how you can settle a price when you're not a party of the negotiations.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah,
well, great.
so-
Thank you, everybody, for participating, and thank you to the panel. I think we should do a quick picture.
Oh, cool.